Hello and welcome to the Giving Voice to Depression podcast, brought to you by Recovery.com, the best place to find mental health and addiction treatment for anyone, anywhere.
Each week, we profile a guest who shares openly about their mental health journey. They share because they understand that when people don't talk about their depression or other mental health conditions, those of us who do struggle with them can feel like we're the only ones, that there's something wrong with us, and that no one understands. We understand.
I'm Terry McGuire, the creator and co-host of this podcast. You have my promise that we'll keep it real here. Depression is real, and we're not going to sugarcoat our discussions about it.
Hope is also real, and you'll get a dose of that here too. I'm Carly McCullough, a licensed social worker and educator, and Terry's daughter. We've both experienced depression and also support loved ones struggling with it. We're here to normalize talking about depression and mental health in our communities, as well as our families.
And to share real-world tested strategies that have worked for other people who have walked similar paths. Thanks for joining us. Hello, Carly.
Hi, Mom. Imagine feeling pinned to the earth by an invisible, crushing weight. For years, Eric lived with that sensation. A profound heaviness that stole his joy, his creativity, his will to care, and sometimes to live.
But what happens when you discover that the very thing holding you down might actually be trying to protect you? This week on Giving Voice to Depression, we'll hear Eric's story of shifting from intellectualizing his depression to literally having a conversation with the boulder that symbolized his struggle.
It's a powerful journey from being pinned to the earth to finding a new kind of rootedness and a surprising sense of peace. Here is Eric giving his voice to depression.
So let's start with where you currently are. When you wrote me, you said that you're emerging from a prolonged depressive period. How long has that been, and what are your indicators that you're coming out of it?
I think that's a great question, because how does one gauge the ways we're moving out of a depressive episode? Especially for those of us that in one way or another feel like they've been wrestling with it their entire life. I think there's this desire to be like, okay, well, I'm done with it. I'm beyond it, and it's no longer affecting me.
But that's seldom the way it works, and it's certainly not how it played out for Eric.
And I think a lot of my struggle has been with the framing of that too, of looking for the silver bullet, looking for the cure, looking for a way to eradicate from my system those aspects that I deemed unworthy or unwelcome. And so when I speak of a lightening or at the very least less of a heaviness, a lot of that I attribute to a feeling of returning to myself, because I think the scariest part of a depressive episode is the apathy. When I stop caring, when I stop giving a shit about anything at all that's happening to me and can no longer move under the negative momentum that has me pinned to the earth. And so it feels like I'm emerging from that because I'm experiencing the parts of myself that I remembered. There's excitement, there's creativity, there's an eagerness to laughter in ways that I remembered were there, but couldn't access for a while. And so those are signs that I can feel that some of that momentum is shifting. And it doesn't mean that I'm no longer depressed. It doesn't mean that I still don't have my bad days. But I'm less pinned underneath them, it feels, than I was for, I don't know, the last 2 to 5 years.
Eric says a key to that shift was allowing himself to feel and grieve the personal, professional, financial, romantic, and state-of-the-world losses he experienced.
It wasn't doing me any good to pretend that I wasn't feeling what I was feeling. And the impulse to pretend otherwise is so real, I think, to not burden ourselves or our people in our life by being honest about what's actually going on, because we don't want to be a burden So a lot of that can be terribly lonely. But yeah, it's more of that capacity for myself to be able to mark internally those signposts that say, oh yeah, you were able to experience this, feel this, hold this, to go there, and you're still here.
If you were willing and able to explain it, and if somebody wanted to hear, how would you explain what it felt like to be in it?
My depression kind of revealed itself as this enormous boulder. If you've ever seen the movie Disney's Hercules, there's this scene where he lifts this enormous boulder that's blocking ultimately the Hydra.
Okay.
But there's this wide shot where he's holding it. It's just massive. It outscales him, like 1,000 to 1. And in a lot of my guided meditations, I could feel the weight of such a boulder like on my chest and just pinning me to the earth. And you can't move, you can't lift it, you're just getting crushed. And that's about how I'd explain it in the moments where you lose all executive function. And again, as I described, it's the complete will to do anything but surrender to the weight of it. In a lot of ways, I was trying to cut out this part of me that felt like it was keeping me from all of the parts of life that I enjoy, all of my ambition, all of the things I wanted to do that I couldn't seem to do because I was trapped under the boulder. And that's how I would describe it to anyone who might not be experiencing it.
And then, because depression's fun that way, it adds shame to that crushing weight.
The shame of feeling like I can't do these things, but I know that I can. I know that I can if I just tried hard enough, or if I wasn't lazy, all the excuses that come in. And yeah, it's wild to go through that gamut, because you feel like it's so simple, just get out of bed, just answer that email, do your taxes, whatever it might be. Yeah. And how completely impossible normal life can feel being a human being.
And from the outside, it just looks like we're not handling life.
Mm-hmm.
So talk to me about that shift.
The shift I was talking about emerging to or through the darkness as of late. Ironically, the boulder plays a starring role. I have been talking lately about this emergence as a shift away from head work, of which I would call talk therapy, intellectualizing our depression, intellectualizing our mental health, as I've begun to understand my tendency to try to maintain control by simply understanding. And if I could only understand, then maybe I could solve, maybe I could cure, maybe I wouldn't be as affected by it. But the more I understood about my depression, the more I kept running into this wall, no matter who I talked to, no matter what therapist I talked to, because the question was always the same. If I'm wrestling with these negative core beliefs, if I can feel this boulder pinning down my soul, my heart, how do you cure, how do you heal a core belief that seems to have been there for as long as I've been on this planet? And nobody I talked to had a great answer.
So instead of trying to intellectualize his way through or out of depression, Eric chose to do what he calls the thorny heart work business of diving into the pit, despite his fear it might swallow him up. He started internal family systems, or IFS therapy, that he says is a bit like Pixar's movie Inside Out, where our individual parts or subpersonalities are identified and explored with a focus on healing and restoring mental balance. One of Eric's parts is the boulder.
I recognized that a lot of my pain was rooted in the part that was holding up the boulder, who I called Atlas. And just like Atlas, he was straining under the weight of this giant boulder. And as I investigated further, I realized that he was holding up the boulder to protect the parts that were trapped underneath it, and turned out to be my innocence and my inner child. And how much love flooded my system at seeing this part that was struggling and straining and under so much weight in doing the job of trying to protect those parts and refusing to let them be crushed.
So, as part of his therapy, he forged a relationship with those parts of himself.
And what began to shift quite literally in conversation with the parts, because that's kind of at the heart of IFS, is that you can begin a relationship with these parts. You can have conversations. You can sit with them and say, what do you need? How can I help? Is there anything you would prefer to be doing that's not holding up the weight of the world? And through that, I was able to, not all the time, but in moments where I felt like the weight was too great, I could talk to Atlas and I could say, why don't you put the boulder down? Just for right now, just for a little bit. You can put it down. You can put the boulder down. You don't have to hold it. You don't have to do what you're doing. You don't have to hold the weight of the world. Just for a little bit. And even that amount of momentary respite helped shift some of that weight. And it also reframed and it helped change, I think, my own opinion about my innocence and my inner child, about like, no, these are the things that I've been fighting and struggling to protect. And so anything I'm doing now must make room for them. And more than that, I will fiercely defend them. I will ensure that my warriors are at the ready to go to war if I have to for them. And they will no longer be trapped under a rock. They will be held warmly and they will be greeted with all the love I can muster.
What did that reframe allow for or feel like?
I mean, it was a start. In the same way, I looked at all of the other possible solutions. I looked at SSRIs, talk therapy, meditation, yoga, all the ways I had tried to numb the weight of the boulder before: sex, drugs, rock and roll, food, usually Taco Bell. It didn't eliminate the boulder. It didn't pulverize it. It didn't ground it into dust. But I think the challenge therein becomes the understanding that this is the work, this is the managing we talk about. It's not about eradicating the boulder, because the boulder is a part of me, and how essential it was for me to feel and go through all of the pain of those long years, those long and dark years, to arrive at this version of myself that I am now. I wouldn't be the person I am without having gone through that, without feeling it, without touching that darkness.
Unlike many past guests who find that externalizing, even naming their depression, helps them separate from and manage it, for Eric,
it was almost the opposite of understanding that, like, this part of myself is simply a part that is crying out for love and attention, and no more would I ignore my inner child lost in the woods crying for comfort than I can ignore the parts of me that are depressed. And just how much I've learned from it about myself, and how much I've been able to return to myself, and how much energy I spent trying to stamp it out, when I could simply be softening into it. And I think that has been the biggest shift, is that the rigidity, the resistance to my depression only deepened it. My inability to accept, my inability to open my arms to the full experience of myself, because I think I was resistant or even entitled to this idea of what my life, what my inner world was going to look like. And I could not accept this part of myself.
Accepting that depression is part of him has allowed Eric to find and use a word he says he hasn't for most of his life.
It's faith. It's a faith that everything's going to be okay. Relinquishing this illusion of control over our lives and understanding that our life is the entire spectrum of our experiences. And we tend to value the positive and the shiny and the glorious over the other side of the spectrum. You know, you've got the yin and the yang. There's a little bit of light in the darkness. There's a little bit of darkness in the light. And I know what it took for me to get through. And there was a time where I wasn't sure if I wanted to be here at all in the darkest moments. But now I have a confidence and a faith in myself in knowing that I want to find out what happens next.
I want to find out what happens next. That reminds us of a previous guest who taught us that in the times you just can't find hope, look for curiosity instead. It can be an easier ask of ourselves, and it points us in the right direction. If someone had said what you just said, and you heard them while you were in it, what part of it do you think you'd have been able to latch on to or believe?
Very little, I feel like. Very little of hearing any advice or, I mean, as we sit on a depression podcast, hopefully offering healing words to people. I think that is one of the most challenging aspects of any of life's difficulties, is that you really do have to experience it for yourself and finding your own in. Because for someone who's going through it, there's almost nothing more revolting than hearing, oh, it's going to get better. You know, gets better. Just wait it out. The impatience, the frustration, it feels insulting sometimes, but there is a softening available to us. Again, I was really stuck on trying to violently exercise these parts of myself, when the greatest movement that I've been able to succeed with in managing my depression has been grace, softening.
It sounds like grace for yourself, for the depression itself, for the boulder, for Atlas. I mean, there are a lot of aspects to it.
Very much so.
While Eric says that softening and grace have not transformed him overnight, they have allowed him to feel more rooted and grounded.
And there's like a meme of a potato on a kitchen table. And, if you leave a potato out, its tendrils grow in 360 degrees. And the caption of the meme is, "Where the f*** is the soil?" But truly, I think when we're in our dark night of the soul, we are so just yearning for soil, for nourishment, and we will reach everywhere to find it. And once we do, we can start the process of growing because we have a little bit of rootedness. And so I don't, while internally it feels radically lighter, I don't carry expectations in the same way, because I think that was where a lot of my suffering came from. Consciously or unconsciously, the expectations I put on myself of how something was supposed to look. And so I used a lot of those expectations to try to forge my path ahead, digging with bloody fingernails through the mud to try to dig that trench forward. And now, with a different understanding of my own rootedness and confidence in that to a degree, in my alignment, the path rises to meet me with every step.
It sounds so much easier.
Oh my God. It's allowing ourselves the permission to not have it all figured out, to not know the answers.
Which we don't anyway.
We don't.
Yeah.
It's all an illusion.
So, Carly, I just love the way that ended with the potato metaphor and the groundedness and the reaching for things and finding something that both nourishes and roots you. And that's my takeaway from Eric's story is we just have to keep looking because we change, the things change. He had probably not heard of the IFS therapy, which I recommend people look up. And he met someone he had not met before, and that person brought his knowledge into his life. And we just never know when some little thing is going to change that can let us make a little change. And that can really make a difference. And it's the difference between curiosity and hope sometimes, that we just find something, some little tiny something to hold on to, and everything can shift.
In his little potato, he said that it grows out in 360 degrees, which if you've ever seen a sprouted potato is exactly how it happens. And so, that there's dozens of eyes on a potato. I say this as someone who recently planted potatoes in my garden, but it goes in all directions. And so for Eric, he just kept talking about rootedness and groundedness and how this boulder, right? There's this real sort of vertical energy in his story of from feeling this pressure of this thing to starting to feel rooted. And I also know that there are folks, and we've heard so many of their stories, who the thing that happened to shift things 1 degree and make things more possible for them came from a different direction. It came from a shoulder-to-shoulder conversation, or it came from a higher power. It came from, right, I'm sort of gesturing vertically and horizontally for listeners. But you don't know where it's coming from. And so for Eric, the story so much is about the weight and the groundedness and the accepting of what was the gift behind the weight. Mm-hmm. And what was it? What was it protecting? What was hiding under the boulder? And it's really wild to think of the thing that is bringing us down as a form of gift. And so often it gets sort of bastardized into toxic positivity of what doesn't kill you makes you stronger, right? There's songs about it and all of that. And I think what Eric's story is reminding us is that there's also a different possible orientation to it. What is it trying to teach me? And this exact same week, I'm on a mailing list of someone named Layla Madeline, and they're based out of Australia. One of the things that Layla writes is, quote, "There was a feeling of panic and urgency in the way that I was relating to my body. Underneath all the symptoms I was experiencing, all the messages my body was trying to communicate to me in the language it knows best, there was a feeling of, oh no, make it stop. Please make it stop. I don't want to feel this way anymore. In a sense, I was trying to shoot the messenger." What a cliche. Wow. When we pathologize what our bodies are doing in response to the stress we're feeling, instead of listening and moving with the messages our bodies are communicating to us, we make our bodies into unsafe and hostile places. The world is already unsafe and hostile. Our bodies don't have to be.
Wow. That's very interesting.
And I also know that that for some people, there's real resistance to go to therapy or to get a diagnosis because the thought is that it's telling you how you're deficient, right? It's telling you the way your brain is wrong or the way that your brain chemicals are not normal. I think there's this real sense of that there must be something wrong with me.
But whatever that it is, exists, whether or not you've named it and have some clues as to how to treat or manage it. Not naming it doesn't take it out of your existence.
No, it doesn't. But it makes me think about, for example, a diagnosis of autism, right? And how in the Maori tradition, the language for someone with autism is someone who sees the world differently. Or someone who sees a different shape in the world. It's how do we sort of treat that piece of us with compassion and not as the enemy. And I think that's what spoke to me in both, Eric's story and also some of Layla's words that I read earlier are that sometimes it's an additional form of violence when we're trying to sort of exercise these parts of ourselves out, as opposed to finding some way to appreciate the boulder.
And allowed Atlas, as he named him, to put the damn thing down once in a while.
Yeah. One thing I will share also is, one of the things that I encourage folks to talk about with young children especially, but I think we could all use it, frankly, is that feelings are information. Feelings are information. And that, one of the primary feelings associated with depression is sadness. And I remember reading that sadness shows you the depth of your feeling, the depth of your care for others in this world. Now, depression is different than sadness, but sadness is one of the feelings that can be associated with it. It's certainly a part of mine. And I do think that there is a beauty in some of these things, and the fact that Eric's done the work. And he sort of talks about how excruciating the work can be, which I also appreciate.
I do too. There's nothing pretty about it.
He calls it thorny.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
I mean, you get pricked and it hurts and it can sting. And if the only way out is through, this is the other side of it. And I think that that's something that a lot of folks who deal with depression maybe never arrive at. So I'm really grateful, first of all, for Eric sharing his story with our listeners. And second of all, I'm really, really proud of him as a friend for having been brave enough to do this work.
It is brave work, and it is difficult work, and it is work that we're likely going to have to do again, as we cycle around and something comes back or gets triggered. But each step forward is a step forward. And as we've talked about, it's a spiral, not a circle. And when we arrive back at what seems like the same point, we're different. So thank you, Eric. And thank you, Carly. I appreciate your debriefing.
Thank you. We really hope that this discussion helps give some language or context to your own depression, or ideas for how to support someone else in your life living with it. We invite you to check out the hundreds of episodes in our archive and to explore both the Resource Hub and treatment options on recovery.com. Depression is too dark a road to walk alone.
We'll be back next week.